Okay, so as I mentioned, we're covering Caleb tonight. Next Wednesday, we're covering Deborah. Her notes are on the back table or on the foyer table in here. You can pick those up on the way out. All right, so as I mentioned, we're studying Caleb, and we're going to be going pretty quick. I encourage everybody to maybe try to read a little bit ahead before we get into this study, because there's a relative amount. It's not necessarily so many different places in the Bible that he's mentioned. It's just that where he is mentioned, they're kind of lengthy readings. So just kind of like, Joshua chapter 14, chapter 15, that sort of thing. So about Caleb, it's generally considered he was born in the late 1400s, or I guess you could say early 1400s, either way, around 1485 BC or so. He had a deliverer and a judge for a younger brother, Othniel, who is mentioned in Judges chapter 3 and in verse 9 as being the younger brother of Caleb. He was 40 years old when he was sent to spy on the land of Canaan. We find that out in Joshua chapter 14, which we are going to be reading a little bit of Joshua 14 and 15 tonight. I think those are probably going to be the only passages we'll have time to actually read a little bit. And in Numbers 34, verse 17 through 19, he is mentioned as being a prince of the tribe of Judah. So we also know, in addition to how old he was when he went into Canaan, we know what tribe he was from as well. So this is just a map to kind of give us an idea of where everything is here. Here's Hebron. In fact, because of Caleb's faith, Caleb is given the land of Hebron as an inheritance. The children of Israel crossed into, here's Jericho up here, here's Jerusalem and Bethlehem, which we're more familiar with Jesus. But here's Jericho here, and this is where the children of Israel crossed into the land of Canaan, or the Promised Land. All right, any questions or thoughts on that? All right, so Numbers chapter 13 and 14, we have the situation with the children of Israel and the report of the spies. In fact, we'll go ahead and go over there and just kind of look at a couple of verses real quick. We see in the beginning of chapter 13 how that God commands Joshua to send spies into the land of Canaan. All of these spies are mentioned. Of course, Caleb is mentioned here, as well as, we've got, starting in verse 4, you've got Reuben, you've got Shaphat, you've got Caleb, you've got Igal, you've got Hoshea, you've got Palti, you've got Gadiel, and then you've got Gadi, and Amiel, and Sether, and Nabai, and so forth. These are all sent to spy out the land of Canaan. And of course, Moses called Hoshea, whose name is Joshua. It's Joshua, the son of Nun, Joshua, in verse 16. So Caleb and Joshua are sent into the land of Canaan to spy out the land. And of all of the ones that are sent into the land of Canaan, how many come back with a good report? 2. Who were they? Joshua and Caleb. Yeah, Joshua and Caleb. And here in chapter 13 and in verse 26, we find how that they depart, they come back to Moses and Aaron. We find in verse 27 how that the spies say, "We went into the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey. This is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the mountains. The Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan." Now, apparently, after they make this report between verse 29 and verse 30, what are the people's reaction? Seem to be a little concerned, about all of these enemies that dwell in this land, because you see in verse 30 how that Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." Now the others who had gone up, they say, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are." They gave the children of Israel a bad report, verse 32, of the land. And then they kind of describes themselves as grasshoppers to the giants of the descendants of Anak. And so chapter 13, the people in chapter 14 and verse 1, the people are all upset. They lift their voices and cry out to the Lord. They wept that night. So you kind of have a big whoop-de-doo about the report that the rest of them gave. But we see in chapters 13 and 14 here, certainly in chapter 13, and we also see here in chapter 14, the courage and the faith that Caleb has. Okay, we're not discounting Joshua here, but certainly Caleb is perhaps the older of the two. But we see how the courage that Caleb has, he says, we're well able to overcome it, as he says in verse 30 of chapter 13. We see in verse 2 of chapter 14 how the people begin to complain and murmur against Moses and Aaron. They, again, this is kind of a familiar refrain here, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us out of this land, verse 3, to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims, and so forth. Then in verse 4, they try to find a leader who will return them to the land of Egypt. And then in verse 6, you see, it's interesting because verse 5, you see Moses and Aaron falling on their faces before the assembly of Israel. I don't think they're falling on their faces in submission. I think it's more they're falling on their faces in sorrow, in perhaps even shame that the children of Israel are acting this way. But you'll notice in verse 6, Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, they tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation, verse 7, of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Now, to me, that's kind of a rousing example of faith, rousing words, okay? But how do the people respond in verse 10? They're going to stone them in verse 10. All the congregation said to stone them with stones. So then what happens after? So what happens then in verse 10? They don't listen to Caleb and Joshua. So who are they going to have to listen to? Yeah, the Lord himself. Go ahead, Doug.
Earlier, you read where Caleb was a prince. Other translations call that a leader or a chief of the people. And you would think maybe even his tribe might listen to him in this big speech he just gave.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the result that should have happened.
Right.
I mean, that's why they were picked.
Right.
That's why each one of these people were picked, because they were leaders. People should be listening and following them.
Well, and just a reminder, I mean, it hasn't been that long yet that the children of Israel were led out of Egypt by the power of God, separating the sea and so forth. I mean, it hasn't been that long that they have forgotten these things.
Well, somewhere in this time, God gave up on them.
Yeah.
He said, this has been 10 times since they left Egypt that they have wanted to go back.
Yeah.
10 times. And, you know, I didn't realize that. I just happened to read that today.
Yep.
I didn't realize they'd gone back, wanted to go back that many times.
Yeah.
And you wonder about the patience of God. You know, how long is it? It is a set point.
Yeah.
It's not forever.
Right.
Patience. There is a point that God said that's enough.
But it's not just 3 strikes and you're out necessarily in this example. Anyway.
It is a lot of time
Yeah.
to say, okay, or...
Let me show you my power again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I see Caleb with so much faith of seeing what happened in Egypt, what happened as they are coming out of Egypt, but time after time after time, every day and every night, they saw God.
Yeah.
A pillar of cloud or a pillar of fire.
Yep.
Every day. If that's not a constant reminder that their God, supernatural abilities every day, giving them, you know, eventually manna and
Yeah.
and quail, and seeing this every day, you wouldn't think they'd be so short-sighted to say, we can't do
Well, and just the fact that God has yet to fail them. You know, it might be different if there were certain things that this Jehovah couldn't do or his power was limited. But his power has been shown consistently to be unlimited. He has yet to fail them. He has yet to fulfill a promise. And when he says he's going to give them the land, that's a promise. And this is what Caleb brings up.
I think we today think people are short, or they think they got to have their need right now.
Yeah.
They're right now. I can't wait. Well, it sounds like they were like that too.
Yeah.
All of a sudden things get a little tough, and right now it'd been better to go back.
Yeah.
How long's it been? They haven't been out of Egypt very long.
No, this is before the 40 years where they wander.
The words I was thinking, instant gratification. They were just as bad as people are today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the rest of verse 10 says, Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel. Verse 11, the Lord goes to Moses, How long will these people reject me? Which goes to show that Caleb spoke the truth in the things that he said, and God, he noticed, first of all, that Caleb stood up for Jehovah, and he acknowledged that faith that Caleb has, but also that the people didn't listen. And Joshua was there as well. They were both standing up saying this. Verse 12, I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them. And of course, Moses has to talk him out of it. And he tries to reason with the Lord, saying, if you destroy the people now, what are the other nations going to say? And so forth. Verse 19, Moses says, Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt, even until now. Moses knew too. Moses was aware of how often the people had rejected God. So in verse 20, the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, but truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times, have not heeded my voice. They certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him, and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. So, obviously God acknowledges the faith of Caleb. He acknowledges the different spirit that exists in him. Then, of course, in verse 26, 27, 28, it is declared to the people, because of what you have done in rejecting me all these times, they're going to have to wander in the wilderness. Verse 30, or verse 29, we're told from the years, all of you who were numbered according to your entire number from 20 years old and above. So everybody 19 years old and under would be allowed to enter. And of course, we could talk about that, but that's not why that's not the study. We're talking about Caleb. Verse 30, except for Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun, you shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. And then of course in verse 33, God says this is how long it's going to be, for 40 years. And this is going to be according to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days. For each day you shall bear the guilt of 1 year. I am the Lord, I have spoken this. And then in verse 36, the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation complain against him by bringing a bad report of the land, these very men who brought the evil report about the land died by the plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive, of the men who went to spy out the land. All right. So, it's kind of it's interesting. You go back and you read these things and you pick up on things, just like Doug said, that maybe you hadn't noticed in studies before, like the 10 times that they had rejected the Lord and so forth. But it's interesting to see the faith of Caleb. I had always just kind of pictured Caleb and Joshua together in all of this. And certainly in chapter 14, they are coupled together. But initially in chapter 13, it was Caleb who spoke up first. It was Caleb who spoke. Joshua wasn't mentioned there in verse 30 of chapter 13. Not that he didn't have confidence too, but again, I think we can generally get the feel that Caleb is perhaps older than Joshua. So there may have been a little bit of experience and age there. But regardless, Caleb certainly, to a certain extent, he stood on his own. It wasn't just Joshua leading and Caleb kind of following behind him. They were both standing up for the Lord, and that was something that really stood out to me. Both of them tear their clothes and they attempt to reason with the people. They even face the threat of being stoned as a result because of their attempts to reason with the people. We're told in verse 24 he has a different spirit. That Jehovah acknowledges that. And of course, he and Joshua are the only two that will be allowed to enter into the promised land. And all of these elements speak to the character, which we're going to talk about here for just a second. And we're not going to go to all these scriptures, but certainly we can see how wholly devoted Caleb was to following the Lord. He believed in the Lord's promises. He accepted the signs and the miracles that God had done. There had been no point that Jehovah had failed them, and so he had no reason to doubt what God says he was going to do. He was allowed to enter the promised land as a result of his willingness to wholly follow the Lord. He was given Hebron as his inheritance. We mentioned that in Joshua chapter 1 and in verse 36 is mentioned specifically. And then he dispersed this inheritance to the rest of the children of Judah, including his daughter. We see this in chapter 15, verses 13 through 19. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question about his lineage, heritage. He is the son of Jephthah the Kenizzite.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the connection to that and being of the tribe of Judah? Or how do those mesh? I don't know what the connection is.
My guess would be, where does it say that he's the son of the Kenizzite?
I think a couple places, but Joshua
13, where the...
13 verse 6, Caleb the son of Jephthah the Kenizzite. I assume the Kenizzites were a Gentile nation. Or tribe, so
I don't know.
I was always wondering how he became part of the tribe of Judah.
The New King James doesn't include that. Does anybody else have anything there? I don't think I caught that before.
I've seen it too.
You've seen it, the Kenizzite?
Yes.
I know it was a tribe. I read a reference that it could have been a nomadic kind of tribe, but again, how does that
Fit into, may have been a sub-tribe of Judah. Maybe it was like, we talk about these different leaders and these ones who, the main families, I guess you could say, of Judah. Maybe one of the main families of Judah were the Kenizzites. And so that could be, but I mean, it's obvious, verse 6, from the tribe of Judah, Caleb, the son of Jephthah, was chosen. So obviously, at least along his father's lineage, or at least I would assume it would be his father's lineage that's being acknowledged as being of the tribe of Judah. Maybe his mother was a Kenizzite. Maybe he was a half, between the tribe of Judah and maybe half of part of Kenizzite. I'll take a look and see if I can.
that history to figure out
Yeah.
how they got to where they are?
Yeah, I'll have to look that up because the King James, the New King James don't even mention anything about the Kenizzite there, and I didn't catch that in looking at the other translations or anything. So I'll look that up and see what the Kenizzite reference, if anybody has any ideas on that in the commentaries. I haven't seen anything about that. Yeah, I'll make a note to look that up. All right. So, other than his lineage, any questions about Caleb at this point? All right, very quickly. After quieting the people, what kind of character does Caleb express in his words? Especially there in verse 30, when they first come back from the tribe of Israel there in chapter 13 and in verse 30. He quieted the people. You can kind of picture him just saying, everybody just hold on, everybody quiet down. And then he has something he wants to say. And what does he say? Let us go up at once. And we don't need to develop some kind of intricate and complex military plan or strategy. Let's go up at once and take possession. So not only was there great faith in Caleb regarding the fact that they were well able to overcome it, but it's implied here the fact that because God has said This is our land. We will take possession. God has given us this land. He will give us the victory over these people. So certainly the fact that the people were well able to overcome it shows faith and trust in God. He understood God's power. That's been shown all along. So certainly the character of complete trust in the Lord is certainly shown there in verse 30. Why did Caleb and Joshua tear their clothes?
There's other passages where people did that to show complete humility and complete amazement of the sin or how bad things were.
Okay.
And that was a sign of disgust and complete, I'll tear my best stuff up because this is just terrible.
Okay. When we see this a lot, both in the Old and New Testaments. Remember when Job first hears all the bad news that he received that day, and it was all in one day. He tore his clothes, he clothed himself in sackcloth, and he put ashes on his head, and he prayed to God. Okay, certainly we see even into the New Testament with Barnabas and Paul, them rending their clothes and running through the midst of the people to, hey, don't do this. It's an expression throughout Jewish history of sorrow, of anger, of shame. So certainly it's deep distress. Okay, however, whatever emotion is being expressed in the context of the situation, it is a deep emotional distress. In fact, Mordecai, in the example with Esther, when that proclamation went out against the Jews, Mordecai tore his clothes and sat in sackcloth and ashes. And so this is deep distress that's being shown, and that's what's being expressed here. Certainly both anger, sorrow, certainly would be applicable. You can feel both of those. And it calls the people to listen. At the very least, they listened. They didn't actually necessarily go along with it, but they did listen to what they said. All right, how do Joshua and Caleb speak with reason to the people in Numbers 14, verses 6 through 9? Of course, Caleb and Joshua both, as they're saying this, say, listen, God has led us out of this land. He has led us out of Egypt. He has promised us this land of Canaan. And notice he says, if God delights in us. Now we see this verses 7, the land we pass through despises an exceeding good land. Verse 8, if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. We're not to fear, verse 9, nor fear the people of the land. They are our bread. I think that's a very interesting way of showing the power of God in comparison to the power of these people living in Canaan. They are our bread. Okay, it's kind of like the modern equivalent of we'll eat them for lunch type of thing. Okay, God is going to give us the victory over these people.
He also said, don't rebel. You're being rebellious by pushing
Yeah.
against this.
Yeah, only do not rebel against the Lord. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, did God want them? I mean, shouldn't the people have known God wanted them to go up and take that land? God had told them that was the plan.
It was one of the promises made to Abraham.
Yeah. One of the land inheritance.
Promise being fulfilled. Great nations come.
Yeah.
It's time for this, and then there's one more promise.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. What does God mean when he says that Caleb has a different spirit? Different in comparison to whom? Everybody else. Yeah, everybody else. Yeah, the majority, right. The majority, at least, especially of those spies, for sure, and all those who were going along with what the rest of the spies said. Caleb has a different spirit. It is a spirit of one who trusts in the Lord. And certainly, isn't that the type of people we are supposed to be? We're in the world, but not what? Of the world. Okay, we are to stand out. We are to be different because we don't go along with the sinful activities and sinful character that people in the world do. You see complete trust and faith and obedience that stands out from the rest of at this point, the children of Israel, or the majority of them. He really wasn't afraid. You don't see any indication of any fear whatsoever from Caleb. And of course, as I mentioned, he was the first back in chapter 13 to raise his voice about, hey, we need to take it up, go up right now and take it. All right, finally, what characteristics can we take from Caleb and apply in our lives? I think having a different or set apart character, for one thing, all right, having a different or set apart spirit is certainly something that God observed. Wholly following the Lord, even to the point where, even though the rest of these individuals say it's not possible, we can't do it, there's no way. Well, God says we can. Okay, and certainly in more of a modern context, people pushing the idea of macroevolution, of maybe even questioning the logistics or the science of resurrection from the dead and so forth. Listen, God says this is what's going to happen. God says this is how he created the heavens and the earth. And I believe him. Certainly willingness to courage to speak up, even among brethren, even perhaps, certainly you would certainly hope that brethren wouldn't get to the point where they're wanting to stone one of us. But certainly there are times perhaps you have to stand up even among the brethren and speak the truth and stand for what's right, even if you're in the minority. And then patiently waiting for the promises, obviously, as Joshua did, or as Caleb did. All right, anything else through Caleb? Okay, don't forget the notes for Deborah are on the back table. Also, I will email those out tonight. Thanks, everybody.